The air within the grand chamber of the High Synod tasted of ozone and ancient dust, a sensory combination that the Valeri species had come to associate with power. Here, beneath the vaulted ceiling carved from the obsidian bones of their homeworld's mantle, the fate of galaxies was often decided in hushed tones that reverberated through the acoustic architecture like the hum of a dying star. Archon Vales, his chitinous plates dull with the gray sheen of advanced age, rested his primary hands upon the sensory console, feeling the tremors of the gathered council. There were no shouts, for the Valeri did not shout. They communicated through the subtle shifting of bioluminescent patterns along their throat sacs and the precise, rhythmic clicking of their mandibles. But today, the silence was heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from arrogance and a creeping, undefined anxiety. The subject of the cycle was a blue marble of a world located in the chaotic, unrefined spiral arm of the galaxy, a region the Synod referred to as the Fallow Sector. The inhabitants called it Earth. To the Valeri, it was merely catalog entry 89 Gamma, a civilization that had barely managed to harness the atom without destroying itself, a species so young in the eyes of the Synod that they were considered less than children. They were biological accidents, flailing in the dark. Vales looked out over the amphitheater, observing the hundreds of representatives from the vassal species that bowed before the Valeri throne. There were the aquatic Hydrak, floating in their suspended gravity tanks, and the crystalline Lithos, chiming softly in agreement with the general mood of dismissal. They were all waiting for the order to annex. It was the standard procedure for the Dominion. When a civilization reached a certain threshold of technological noise, usually the chaotic broadcasting of radio waves followed by crude warp jumps, the Dominion would swoop in, impose order, and integrate the new species as a labor caste before they could hurt themselves, or more importantly, disrupt the carefully curated stagnation of the galaxy. General Kruk, a Valeri of immense size and scarred carapace, stepped forward, his throat sacs flashing a deep, aggressive crimson. He projected a hologram into the center of the chamber, a spinning, grainy representation of the human fleet. It was pathetic by Dominion standards. Blocky, utilitarian ships relying on combustion and primitive ion drives, leaking radiation like wounded animals. They are loud, Kruk clicked, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. They scream into the void with no discipline. Their transmissions are a cacophony of conflicting ideologies, art, and war. They have no central unity. They are a fractured mind in a fragile body. My fleets are positioned at the edge of their system, waiting for the High Synod's blessing to bring the silence. It will be a mercy. They are children playing with fire, and they have already burned their own fingers. We shall extinguish the flame before they set the house ablaze. Vales hesitated, though he could not explain why. His sensory tendrils twitched, picking up a dissonance in the data that his conscious mind struggled to categorize. The humans were indeed primitive. Their history, which the Dominion spies had downloaded from the open, unsecured human networks, was a tapestry of bloodshed and irrationality. They fought over resources that were abundant in the stars. They worshipped invisible deities while ignoring the laws of physics. They aged and died with a rapidity that horrified the long-lived Valeri. By all metrics, they were a fleeting spark, destined to fade. And yet there was something in the way they looked at the stars. The images captured by long-range drones showed human crews standing at the viewports of their tin can ships, staring out not with fear, but with a hunger that bordered on madness. It was not the hunger of a conqueror, but the hunger of an explorer who knows no boundaries. It was a look Vales had read about in the ancient archives, belonging to the precursors who had vanished eons ago. "Is there no diplomatic recourse?" Vales asked, his voice low, the blue light of contemplation pulsing at his neck. "We have not attempted to hail them. We assume their incompetence, General, but we have not verified their wisdom. Sometimes the young see what the old have forgotten." A ripple of amusement went through the chamber. The Lithos chimed in dissonant laughter. Kruk's mandibles clicked in a staccato rhythm of condescension. "Wisdom? Archon, they have barely left their gravity well. They attach chemical explosives to metal tubes to break orbit. They are not ready for the conversation of the stars. If we speak to them as equals, we validate their chaos. We must show them the ceiling of the universe so they do not try to jump higher than their legs can carry them. My strategists estimate a total pacification time of 3 solar rodat. Ions, minimal casualties, provided they surrender. If they resist, well, the universe has no shortage of dust. The debate continued for hours, a circular reinforcement of their own superiority. They spoke of the hierarchy of age, a philosophical doctrine that governed the Dominion. It stated that the oldest civilizations held the moral imperative to rule, for survival was the only true metric of wisdom. The Valeri had survived for 10 million years. The humans had been civilized for barely 10,000. The math was absolute. The logic was flawless. There was no room for deviation. The order was drafted, the digital signature of the Synod attached, and the command was sent via hyperwave to the armada waiting on the periphery of the Sol system. The mood in the chamber shifted from debate to self-congratulatory satisfaction. They were the gardeners of the galaxy, pruning the wild weeds. But as the command was sent, the lights in the grand chamber flickered. It was a subtle thing at first, a dimming of the bioluminescent moss that lined the architectural ribs of the hall, followed by a low-frequency thrum that vibrated in the fluid of their inner ears. Vales gripped the console. "Report," he commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the delegates. "Is there a power fluctuation in the planetary grid?" "Negative, Archon," came the voice of the system's overseer, a tremor of confusion in the tone. "The grid is stable. The fluctuation is external. We are detecting a gravitational anomaly, not in the system, here, directly above the capital." The great holographic dome that mirrored the sky above the Hall of Echoes suddenly shifted. The view of the twin suns of Valor Prime, usually a comforting golden embrace, was distorted. The light bent, twisted, and smeared as if a giant invisible hand were kneading the fabric of spacetime. The sensors began to scream, not with the sharp alert of a collision, but with the overwhelming static of data saturation. It was as if the sensors were trying to read the ocean by tasting a single drop of water and drowning in the process. "Shields," Kruk roared, his warrior instincts overriding his arrogance. "Raise the planetary defense grid. What is happening?" "Space is folding," the overseer gasped. "It is not a warp jump. It is not a hyperlane breach. The coordinates are localized. Something is pushing the universe aside." And then the sky broke. It did not open. It shattered. The golden atmosphere of Valor Prime was pierced by a shape so large that the perspective of those on the ground could not comprehend it. It was not a fleet. It was a single structure, a vessel of such monumental scale that it blotted out the primary sun, casting the capital city into an instant, artificial twilight. The wind howled as the atmospheric displacement created hurricane-force gusts, slamming against the reinforced spires of the Synod. In the grand chamber, the hologram dissolved into static, unable to render the object. Vales looked up through the transparent apex of the dome, his primary eyes widening until they hurt. The object was dark, a matte black that seemed to drink the light, absorbing the radar and sensor pings sent against it. It was a monolith, a slab of geometry that defied the sleek curves of Valeri aesthetics. It was brutalist, industrial, and yet possessed of a terrifying elegance. Along its flanks, which stretched from horizon to horizon, massive lights began to ignite, not the harsh blue of ion engines, but a soft, pulsing amber, like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. "Size estimate," Vales whispered, the arrogance of the last few hours evaporating like mist in a furnace. It does not scan, Archon," the overseer replied, his voice breaking. "Visual confirmation suggests a length of over 500 kilometers. It is not a ship. It is a moon, a constructed moon." The chamber descended into chaos. The Hydrak tanks bubbled frothy with panic. The lithos chimed in high-pitched distress. General Kruk was barking orders to the orbital defense platforms, but his commands were met with silence. "Why are the batteries not firing?" he screamed. "They are offline, General," the overseer said, the despair evident. "We have been dampened. The object. It is emitting a field, not an EMP. It is a suppression field. It has simply told our physics to stop working." "That is impossible," Kruk snarled. "No weapon can rewrite local physics." "It is not a weapon," Vales said, a sudden chilling clarity washing over him. He watched the massive vessel hover silently, defying gravity with an ease that suggested it wasn't fighting the planet but simply ignoring it. "It is a statement." A sound resonated through the hull of the station, through the air, through the very bones of every being in the capital. It was not a broadcast over the radio. It was a vibration of the air itself, manipulated with such precision that it formed words in the Valeri tongue, spoken with perfect aerifying accentuation. "We are the vanguard of Sol. We have received your declaration of order. We have come to file an appeal." The voice was synthetic but carried an undercurrent of organic warmth, a duality that was deeply unsettling. It was calm. It was polite, and it was coming from a ship that could crack the planet in half by simply lowering its altitude. "Open a channel," Valles ordered. He stood tall, smoothing his ceremonial robes, though his hands trembled. "If they wanted us dead, we would be ash. They are talking. We must talk back." "This is a trick," Kruk hissed. "They are primitives. This must be a stolen relic, a precursor ship they found and managed to activate. They cannot understand what they wield." "If a child finds a loaded gun, General, you do not provoke him," Valles snapped, his authority cutting through the general's bluster. "You speak softly. Connect me." The holographic emitters sputtered and reformed. The image that appeared was not the chaotic, dirty interior of the human ships they had monitored. It was a pristine, white room devoid of clutter. In the center sat a single human. She was female, gray-haired, her face lined with the passage of time, a detail that surprised Valles, who expected the smooth, gene-edited perfection of a high-tier species. She wore a simple uniform of dark blue, unadorned by medals or gold. Her hands were folded on a desk of natural wood. Behind her, a window looked out, not at space, but at a garden. A lush, vibrant garden with trees and running water inside the ship. "I am High Archon Valles of the Valari Dominion," he said, projecting his voice to be steady. "To whom am I speaking, and what is the meaning of this intrusion?" The human woman smiled. It was a small, tired smile, lacking the predatory bearing Valles was accustomed to in diplomatic standoffs. "I am Admiral Ilara Vance, commander of the starship Verdant Horizon. The meaning, Archon, is that we overheard your council's decision to annex our home. We found the timing inconvenient, so we accelerated our transit to discuss the matter in person." "Accelerated?" Kruk interjected, stepping into the pickup field. "You are from the Fallow sector. That is thousands of light years away. Your conventional drives would take centuries. Even with stolen warp tech, you could not be here this fast unless you left before we even convened." Admiral Vance's eyes shifted to the general, cool and analytical. "Stolen warp tech? Is that what you think we use? General, we folded the space between Sol and Valor. We did not travel through the distance. We removed the distance. It is an older method, one we stopped using for routine travel because of the energy cost, but for an emergency diplomatic mission, we made an exception." The silence in the grand chamber was absolute. Folding space was a theoretical concept in Valari science, something the ancient archives hinted at, but declared impossible due to the infinite energy requirements. "You speak of impossibilities," Valles said, trying to regain the footing of the conversation. "You are a young species, your radio waves, your chemical rockets. We have seen them. We have monitored your infancy." Vance nodded slowly. "Yes, you saw what we wanted you to see. You saw the cradle. You saw the noise. We are a sentimental species, Archon. We keep our old technologies. We keep our radio broadcasts. We like the static. It reminds us of where we started. But did you never wonder why a species so chaotic had not destroyed itself yet? Did you think it was luck?" She leaned forward and the camera zoomed in slightly, increasing the intimacy of the threat. "You judge civilization by the age of the current regime. You see the Valari 10 million years unbroken, and you see strength. You see Earth a few thousand years of recorded history, and you see weakness. But you are looking at the surface. You thought Earth was young because we act young. We are loud, we are passionate, we make mistakes. But the Verdant Horizon, she is not young. This ship was built when your sun was still stabilizing its fusion cycle." Valles felt the blood drain from his face plates. That is a lie. If you were that old, you would rule the galaxy. You would be the apex." "We were," Vance said softly. "And we realized it was boring, it was stagnant, like your dominion, so we pulled back. We returned to our cradle, we dismantled our empire, and we decided to live. To experience life without the burden of controlling everything. We planted a garden and we tended to it. But when the neighbor decides to pave over the garden because he thinks it's a vacant lot, well, the gardener has to go to the shed and get the tools." "You are bluffing," Kruk roared, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "You bring one ship, one oversized transport. My fleet is vast. We have dreadnoughts, planet crackers, swarms of fighters that can blot out the stars. You are one target." "Vance C." Ged looking down at her desk for a moment before meeting the general's gaze again. "General, please, do not make me demonstrate. This vessel is not a warship. It is a terraformer. It is designed to restart dead stars and knit together broken planets. The energy required to do that. If I were to direct it offensively, I wouldn't need to fire a weapon. I would simply point the navigational deflector at your fleet and turn it on. You would be atomized by the sheer output of our engine wake. We demand you stand down. Kruk shouted, slamming his fist on the console. All batteries fire, override the suppression, fire everything. The command went through. The Valeri military discipline was absolute, and the gunners on the ground and in orbit managed to bypass the safety locks, manually forcing the systems to engage. Beams of coherent plasma, antimatter missiles, and kinetic railgun slugs erupted from the surface of Valor Prime and the orbital rings. The sky lit up with the fury of a galaxy-spanning empire unleashing its might on a single point. The grand chamber shook with the recoil of the planetary guns. Valles watched in horror. He had not wanted this. He knew with a sinking dread that they had just made a mistake from which there was no return. The barrage struck the verdant horizon. And nothing happened. There were no explosions, no flare of shields. The energy beams simply vanished. The missiles dissolved into mist before impact. The kinetic slugs stopped dead in space, then slowly drifted away like dust motes in a sunbeam. Absorption, the system's overseer whispered, his voice trembling with awe. They didn't deflect it, they ate it. The ship absorbed the energy output of a planetary bombardment and fed it to its capacitors. On the screen, Admiral Vance hadn't even flinched. She brushed a speck of invisible dust from her sleeve. As I said, we are energy positive. Thank you for the top-up, General. Our reserves were running a fraction low after the jump. She stood up. Now I am coming down. I think it is time we had a face-to-face discussion about the definition of primitive. The transmission ended. The arrival of the human shuttle was an exercise in psychological warfare, though Valles suspected the humans simply considered it efficiency. The verdant horizon remained in the upper atmosphere, a darkly looming god, while a small craft, sleek and silver, descended toward the Synod's landing spire. It made no sound. It displaced no air. It simply existed at one point and then existed at a lower point, mocking the laws of aerodynamics. When the airlock hissed open, Valles stood at the head of the delegation, flanked by Kruk and the high priest of the Lithos. He expected a retinue of guards, power-armored soldiers, weapons drawn. Instead, 3 humans walked out. Admiral Vance was in the center. To her left was a tall man in civilian robes holding a data slate. To her right, a younger woman carrying a simple metal case. They were unarmed. They walked with a casual, fluid grace that contrasted sharply with the stiff, ceremonial marching of the Valeri Honor Guard. The air in the landing bay was tense, thick with the smell of alien fear pheromones. Valles stepped forward, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of respect he had not offered to another species in 400 years. Admiral Vance, you are bold to come without an escort. Vance looked around the bay, taking in the ranks of insectoid soldiers with their oscillating energy pikes. We brought an escort, Archon. She's parked upstairs. If anything happens to us, the Horizon has instructions to decompose the crust of this planet to its constituent elements. It's an automated protocol, very hard to cancel. She smiled again, that disarming, terrifyingly calm smile. But I don't think that will be necessary. We are civilized people, are we not? They were led to the inner sanctum, a smaller, more private chamber used for high-level negotiation. The walls were lined with the history of the Valeri, murals depicting their rise from the mud, their conquest of the stars, their establishment of the Pax Valeria. Vance studied the murals as they walked, her eyes tracing the painted timelines. You have a rich history, she commented. 10 million years, impressive stability. It is the order of things, Valles said, finding his voice. Chaos brings death, order brings life. We enforce order to protect the galaxy from itself. And that is why you wanted to annex Earth? The man with the data slate asked. He spoke softly, but his voice carried a weight of intellect. Because we seemed chaotic. Because you are chaotic, Kruk snapped, unable to remain silent. We watched your broadcasts, you argue, you fight. You have 1,000 religions, 1,000 languages. You are inefficient. The man nodded. I am Dr. Aris. I'm a xenohistorian. You see inefficiency, General. We see adaptation. You see the Valeri have not changed in 10 million years. Your technology has plateaued. Your culture is static. You have solved your society. But the universe is not static. It changes. And when the universe changes, the static break. They reached the table. Valles sat, gesturing for the humans to do the same. You claim to be ancient, Valles said. Yet you live on Earth, a planet that has recovered from an ice age only recently in geological terms. Explain this paradox. Vance placed her hands on the table. Earth is not our home, Archon. It is a nature preserve. It is a hatchery. The revelation hung in the air. The Valari delegates exchanged glances. "We originated on a world that no longer exists," Vance continued, her voice taking on a storytelling cadence, ancient and rhythmic. "We expanded, we conquered, we built Dyson spheres and stellar engines, we fought wars that extinguished constellations. We did everything you are doing, but we did it when your ancestors were still single-celled organisms in the primordial soup. And we reached the end of the tech tree. We found that we could do anything. We could be immortal. We could manipulate reality." And, Valey's whispered, "And we realized that without struggle, without mortality, without the chaos of growth, we were no longer human. We were becoming machines. Cold, dead, so we made a choice. We built the orcs ships like the verdant horizon, and we sent them into the dark spaces between galaxies to sleep. And on Earth and a dozen other worlds, we seeded ourselves again. We stripped away our technology, our memories, our immortality. We reset the clock. We wanted to experience the climb again. We wanted to feel the wind on our faces and fear the dark, because only in the dark can you find the light. You'd evolved yourselves on purpose," the Lithos priest chimed, the concept vibrating through his crystal body in sheer disbelief. "We recycled ourselves," Vance corrected, "to keep the spark alive, but we left guardians, the orcs. They watch over the hatcheries. They wait for the signal that the children have reached the threshold again, or for the signal that the children are in danger." She leaned forward, her eyes hard. "You triggered the alarm, Archon. You threatened the hatchery. The verdant horizon woke up, and she is very, very protective." Valey sat back, his mind reeling. The implications were staggering. The primitives were not just advanced. They were the effective gods of the ancient era, playing a game of mortality for their own amusement. The Valari Dominion, with all its pomp and history, was essentially a child stumbling into a retirement home for warlords and demanding their lunch money. "What do you want?" Valey's asked, his voice hoarse. "Tribute, submission, you could dismantle the Dominion in a day." "We don't want to rule you," Vance said, shaking her head. "We've done the Empire thing. It's exhausting, too much paperwork. We want you to leave Earth alone. We want you to mark the Sol sector as a protected wilderness zone." And, she paused, glancing at the younger woman with the metal case. "And we need your help," Vance said. The shift was so sudden that Valey's blinked. "Help! You possess a ship that eats planetary bombardments. What could you possibly need from us?" "The reason we woke up wasn't just you," Dr. Ara said, tapping his data slate. A hologram sprang up between them. It showed a star chart of the galaxy, but with a creeping, red darkness moving in from the galactic north. "The Dominion has been so focused on maintaining order within its borders that you haven't looked outside them. Your long-range sensors are tuned to filter out background noise. But that noise isn't background. It's a signal," the young woman said, opening the metal case to reveal a glowing, complex crystal. "A signal from the other arcs, the ones we sent to other galaxies." Vance's expression grew grim. "There is something eating the stars in Andromeda, a swarm, biological, adaptive, and hungry. It consumes biomass and energy. It doesn't want to conquer, it wants to feed. We call it the entropy tide." She pointed to the red darkness. "It's crossing the void. It will be here in less than a century. The verdant horizon is powerful, but she is one ship. We have other sleepers, and we are waking them up, but we need a fleet. We need numbers. We need a logistic network." Vance looked at General Kruk. "You said we have no discipline, that we are chaotic. That is true, but you have order, you have infrastructure, you have billions of soldiers who know how to follow commands. We have the technology of the ancients, the big guns, the shield generators that can cover solar systems. But we don't have the manpower to hold the line." "You want an alliance," Valey said, the pieces fitting together. "We want a partnership," Vance corrected. "The old guard and the new order. We provide the spear, you provide the shield wall. If we fight alone, we might win, but the galaxy it'll burn in the process. If we fight together, we can save the garden." The room was silent for a long time. Valey's looked at the hologram of the creeping Red Death. He looked at the human admiral who sat with the weight of eons in her eyes, yet wore the fragile skin of a mortal. He looked at Kruk, who was staring at the technical readouts of the verdant horizon with a mix of terror and professional lust. "If we refuse," Kruk asked, though the bite was gone from his voice. "Then we will defend Sol," Vance said simply. "And we will watch the Dominion be consumed. We can jump to another galaxy. You cannot." Valey stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the landing bay where the human shuttle sat, a silver needle against the obsidian architecture of his people. He looked up at the sky, where the massive shadow of the verdant horizon blotted out the sun. He realized that the definition of strength he had held for centuries was wrong. Strength wasn't about being unmovable. Strength was about the capacity to change, to become young again. To plant a tree knowing you might not sit in its shade, but fighting to ensure someone else does. He turned back to the table. He looked at his hands, the hands of a ruler of a stagnation empire. "The Valeri do not flee," Vales said, "and we do not let our garden burn." He extended a hand across the table, a human gesture he had seen in the archives. "The Dominion stands with Earth," Vales declared. "Teach us how to fight the dark." Admiral Vance stood and took his hand. Her grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly strong. "Good," she said, and for the first time her smile reached her eyes, revealing a glimmer of the terrifying, beautiful fire that had once burned across the cosmos. "Now, let's get to work. We have a lot of upgrades to install on your ships, and I hope your engineers are ready to relearn physics from scratch." As the humans and aliens bent over the star charts, the verdant horizon overhead pulsed its amber lights once. A signal that was received not just by the Valeri, but by buried receivers on 1,000 worlds across the spiral arm. The sleepers were waking up. The children were ready. And the galaxy, for the first time in 10 million years, was no longer stagnant. It was alive, dangerous, and united. The attack had been a misunderstanding, but the war was just beginning. And with the humans leading the charge, the Valeri pitied whatever was coming out of the dark. For they had thought Earth was young, and they had been wrong. Earth was timeless, and it had brought its grandfather's gun.